The timestamp on the confirmation email read 11:47 a.m. Claire Navarro stared at it for a long time. The subject line was clinical, almost boring. Filing confirmation, case number 2024-DR-08847. She had been preparing this moment for 8 months. 8 months of quietly copying documents, memorizing account numbers, learning which of Marcus's assistants went to lunch between 12 and 1. 8 months of waiting for a day when Marcus would be in Vancouver, 1,200 miles away, unable to walk through the front door mid-signature. She had pictured this moment as something enormous, a door slamming, a weight lifting, a sound. It was just an email. She closed the laptop and pressed her fingers against her eyelids. Outside the kitchen window, the private garden of the Whitmore estate looked like it always did. Immaculate, symmetrical, expensive, and utterly devoid of anything she had chosen herself. She had 45 minutes before Marcus's assistant typically did the daily security sweep of her calendar and emails. She used 30 of them to pack a bag. Her name before Whitmore was Claire Navarro. Still was, legally, which was the one thing Marcus had never managed to change despite 2 years of casual suggestions that her professional publications would be easier to find under a unified name. At 34, Dr. Claire Navarro had published 11 peer-reviewed studies on coral reef ecosystems in the Pacific. She had spent 4 months at a research station off the coast of Papua New Guinea, living on a converted fishing vessel with 6 other scientists, a temperamental generator, and a standing argument about whose turn it was to descend first. She had discovered a previously undocumented bleaching pattern in the Coral Triangle that had made it into a congressional briefing on climate impact. She had been, in the language of her field, someone to watch. She had met Marcus Whitmore at a foundation gala. He had asked intelligent questions about her research. He had remembered what she said between the appetizer and the main course, and referenced it back to her over dessert. He was 41, handsome in the architectural way of men who had always had money. And when he looked at her across that table, he looked at her the way people looked at something rare. She understood now that rare was a collector's word. She had left her research position 14 months after the wedding. Not because Marcus asked her to leave. He never asked directly. He said things like, "I worry about you traveling so much in the 3rd trimester," and "I just think the fieldwork is a lot to balance with everything we have here," and "I'm not telling you what to do, Claire. I just want you to be safe." He said these things with such genuine concern that she felt ungrateful for noticing the pattern. The research position had been temporary anyway, grant-dependent. The timing just happened to work out. She had not published anything in 3 years. She had not been in the ocean in 3 years. She had attended 37 charity dinners, learned to host for 12 without visible effort, and developed an encyclopedic knowledge of Marcus's preferences. The thread count of his sheets, the specific brand of sparkling water that he would accept, the angle at which the blinds needed to sit in his study to prevent the 4 p.m. glare he claimed gave him headaches. She had become, by incremental and barely perceptible degrees, invisible. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that kind of disappearing. It doesn't feel like disappearing. It feels like compromise. It feels like love, even. You tell yourself that the person who stays is still you, just a quieter version, a more considerate version, a version that understands what really matters. You don't realize the version that stayed is no longer quite sure what her own name sounds like. The divorce filing was the first decision she had made entirely on her own in 37 months. Her phone died at 2:14 p.m. Not the battery. She had charged it to 93% before she left the house. One moment, it was a phone, and the next moment, it was a black rectangle. When she pressed the power button, nothing happened. She was standing on the corner of Meridian and 5th, her overnight bag on her shoulder, and a coffee she had bought more to have somewhere to stand than to drink. Around her, the afternoon moved in the way Charlotte afternoons moved in late October. Gray, indifferent, smelling of rain that hadn't arrived yet. She tried the power button again. Still nothing. At 2:21 p.m., she walked into a phone store and asked to use their demo model to access her email. The representative was 17 and visibly confused by her request, but slid an unlocked display phone across the counter. The email account was gone. Not the email itself, the account. Deactivated. When she typed her address into the recovery portal, it returned a single line. This account does not exist. She stood in the phone store for a moment, holding a stranger's demo phone, and understood what had happened. Marcus was in Vancouver. But Marcus had people everywhere else. The joint account, she knew, was probably already frozen. She had prepared for this. She had a separate account, a small one, under her maiden name, opened 6 months ago at a branch Marcus had no reason to use. There was $1,100 in it. Enough for a few nights at a mid-range hotel, enough to call her attorney, enough to buy time. She thanked the 17-year-old and walked back outside. The black car was parked at the curb. It wasn't remarkable at first. Black cars were common in this neighborhood. But this one had been there when she'd walked in, and it was still there now, engine running, and the man standing beside the rear door was looking directly at her. He was wearing a charcoal suit. No livery, no company logo. He was approximately 50 years old, with the kind of face that had seen a great many things and was politely declining to discuss them. "Dr. Navarro," he said. She stopped. Nobody in Charlotte called her Dr. Navarro. She was Mrs. Whitmore at charity dinners, Claire at the coffee shop, and, for the past 8 months of quiet document collection, nothing at all. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Graham. I work for Mr. Nicholas Reed." He said it the way you state a city or a temperature, a fact that requires no decoration. "He'd like to offer you a meeting, at your convenience, though he did ask me to mention that your situation may be developing faster than you anticipated, and the meeting might be more useful sooner than later." Claire looked at the car, then at Graham. "I don't know Nicholas Reed," she said. "He's aware of that," Graham said. "He knows you, however. He says you'll understand when he explains." She stood on the sidewalk in the gray October air, the dead phone in her pocket, $1,100 in an account Marcus didn't know about, and no particular plan for the next 4 hours. "Where?" she said. "The marina," Graham said. "It's approximately 20 minutes from here." She should not have gotten in. She knew that. She had spent her research years in enough genuinely dangerous situations to understand the basic calculus of unknown variables. A stranger's car, an unverified name, a destination she hadn't chosen. But she also knew that Marcus had people in this city, that the hotel she'd planned to check into was on a street his company owned property on, that her attorney's office was a 6-minute walk from Marcus's Charlotte headquarters, and that the security chief who swept her calendar knew the building by sight. She had planned for 8 months, and Marcus had moved in 2 hours. She got in the car. The marina was 23 minutes south, at a private facility that didn't appear on any app she'd tried to use in better times. The gate opened before Graham slowed down. They drove past sailing vessels and sport cruisers, past a row of covered slips where fiberglass hulls gleamed dully under the October sky, until the road ended at a dock that jutted 200 feet into the gray water. At the end of the dock was a yacht. Not the largest she'd seen. Marcus had attended enough events on larger ones that she'd lost the capacity to be impressed by sheer size. But this one had a quality she couldn't immediately name. It looked used. Not worn. Used. The kind of vessel that had been somewhere and would go somewhere else, not the kind that existed to be looked at from the shore. Graham walked her to the gangway and stopped. "He's on the aft deck," Graham said. He asked me to tell you, nothing is required of you. If you'd like to leave at any point, I'll drive you wherever you need to go. Claire looked at him. That's an unusual thing to lead with. Mr. Reed thought you'd appreciate unusual, Graham said. Nicholas Reed was sitting at a teak table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder, wearing the kind of clothes that billionaires wore when they wanted to communicate that they'd stopped caring about clothes. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, expensive shoes that had seen actual wear. He was perhaps 48, with the lean, slightly weathered look of someone who spent real time outdoors and not merely decorative time at resort pools. He stood when she reached the deck. "Dr. Navarro," he said, "thank you for coming. I know this is an unconventional introduction." "Unconventional is one word," Claire said. She stayed near the railing, the open exit behind her a deliberate choice. "You know my name. You know what happened today. You've been watching me." "Not you specifically," Reed said. He gestured to the chair opposite him. She didn't sit. He remained standing, which she noted. "My legal team has been monitoring Marcus Whitmore's financial activities for 18 months. We're in a competing bid for Pacific development rights, the same region, incidentally, where your research was conducted. In the process of their due diligence on Whitmore Capital, they flagged a pattern." He paused. "Yours." She looked at him. 3 years of published work, then nothing, Reed continued. A byline that disappears. A scientist with a reputation in a specific region who is suddenly no longer affiliated with any institution. My team noted it as a peripheral detail, but I recognized your name. "From?" He picked up the manila folder and held it out. She crossed the deck and took it. Inside was a printout, her own paper. Reef Thermal Stress Indicators and Predictive Modeling for the Bismarck Sea Corridor, co-authored with 3 colleagues, published in 2021 in the Journal of Marine Ecology. She had written the central methodology section at 2 a.m. on a research vessel while a tropical depression built 50 miles to the east and someone's sonar equipment made a sound like a distant argument. She looked up. "That paper," Reed said, "changed a site assessment my company had commissioned for a development project north of Manus Island. Our initial survey said the reef system was stable. Your bleaching models indicated otherwise. We delayed the project. Had we proceeded on the original timeline, we would have broken ground during a thermal event that would have triggered a regulatory shutdown and forfeit of a $400 million lease." He paused. "Your paper is the reason that didn't happen." Claire stared at the printout. "You never knew," Reed said. "It wasn't a question." "Nobody told me," she said. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was not. "Hit like and subscribe if you've ever done work that mattered and had no idea." She sat down, not because he had offered the chair again, because her legs made the decision without consulting her. 3 years. She had left her research position and spent 3 years learning to fold napkins into birds, and remember which of Marcus's colleagues preferred their handshake met firmly and which found it aggressive. 3 years of becoming less and less the person who had descended into the Pacific at 5 a.m. to photograph bleached coral formations before the light changed. And somewhere in those 3 years, a paper she'd written on a rocking vessel during a storm had traveled to a boardroom in Singapore and changed a $400 million decision. She had not known. She had not known because Marcus had never told her. He received her professional correspondence. She had allowed it. Allowed. That was the word she used, though she understood now the difference between allowing and being edged toward. Because coordinating 2 inboxes was complicated. Because she was adjusting to the marriage. Because it had seemed temporary. It had not been temporary. "Why today?" she said. Reed looked at her steadily. "What do you mean?" "You said your team flagged me 18 months ago. You've known who I am for at least that long. Why today? Why right now, 2 hours after the filing?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, because today you moved. For 8 months you were still. I didn't want to approach you while you were still. She absorbed this. That sounds like surveillance, she said. It was, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. You can be angry about it. She looked out at the water. The harbor was going gray with the afternoon, the surface moving in the particular small chop of a sheltered marina when the wind comes from the northeast. She had grown up in coastal California. She knew what water looked like when it was deciding what to do next. What do you want? She said. Nothing, Reed said. That's the accurate answer, and I understand it sounds false. I wanted to meet you. I've thought about meeting you for 3 years. When my team told me this morning what was happening, I thought, if there was ever a moment she might want to be somewhere other than where she expected to be, it's today. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again. I have no agenda beyond that. That's an extraordinary thing to say to someone you've never met. You're an extraordinary person, Reed said simply. Your work is extraordinary. What happened to it is... I don't have a charitable word for what happened to it. The sun had dropped behind the tree line before she realized she'd been on the deck for 2 hours. They had talked. She wasn't sure exactly when she had stopped watching the exit and started watching his face instead. But the transition had happened somewhere in the second hour, during a discussion of sediment displacement patterns in the Coral Triangle that Marcus would have interrupted after 40 seconds to redirect to something about himself. Reed did not interrupt. He asked questions that indicated he had actually read her work. Not skimmed it, read it. And when she corrected a misconception he had about thermal tolerance thresholds, he wrote it down. He physically pulled a notepad from somewhere and wrote it down. She couldn't remember the last time she had corrected someone and had it received as a gift rather than a complication. She was halfway through a sentence about longitudinal reef surveys when Graham appeared at the top of the stairway from the lower deck. He did not interrupt. He simply stood at the railing in the way that meant something was happening on the dock. Reed looked at him. How many? 2 cars, Graham said. 4 people. One of them is Whitmore. Claire felt the familiar cold settle into her sternum. The physical response she had spent 3 years training herself to hide. The tightening, the recalibration, the rapid assessment of every variable in the room. She started to rise. You don't have to go, Reed said. He has attorneys with him, she said. So do I, Reed said. They've been on the lower deck since 2 p.m. She looked at him. I told you, Reed said quietly. Your situation was moving faster than you anticipated. I asked my legal team to be available. He paused. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go down to the dock. You don't have to speak to him. But if you want to, I'll go with you. She thought about it for exactly 9 seconds. Let's go, she said. Marcus Whitmore in a fury was a particular and practiced thing. He had learned, somewhere in his 44 years, that visible rage was a liability, that the men who frightened people most were the ones who stayed perfectly still and spoke very softly. He deployed this knowledge the way he deployed most things, strategically, with full awareness of the effect. He was standing at the foot of the gangway when Claire came down, and his face was doing the controlled version, the jaw set, the eyes pleasant, the voice already calibrated to the register that made observers feel she was the unreasonable one. Claire, he said, I'm glad you're safe. I was worried. She had heard this sentence in 20 different forms over 3 years. She no longer translated it. She simply heard the words. Marcus, she said. He looked past her at Reed, and something shifted in his expression. A recalculation. Mr. Reed, Marcus said. The pleasantness in his voice had a different quality now. I didn't realize you were acquainted with my wife. Estranged wife, Reed said. He said it without inflection, the way Graham had stated facts. Dr. Navarro filed this morning. It's a matter of public record. This is a private conversation, Marcus said. You're standing on a public marina, Reed said. One of Marcus's attorneys stepped forward, a tall man in a very good suit who looked like he had been performing competence since birth. Dr. Navarro, I'm representing Mr. Whitmore in— I know who you are, Claire said. She surprised herself with her own voice. It was steady. You're the fourth attorney he's cycled through in 3 years. Your firm represented him in the Meridian Partners dispute. The attorney looked at her with new attention. Claire, Marcus said, and the pleasantness was dropping now, becoming something more efficient underneath. This is not the place. Come home. We'll discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss privately, she said. It's already filed. You were not in a position to make that decision unilaterally. The sentence landed in the air between them. She had heard it before, in its various forms. You weren't thinking clearly. You were overwhelmed. You didn't understand the implications. All the versions of the same sentence, the sentence that meant, your decisions require my review. She was entirely in a position to make that decision, Reed said. His voice was still perfectly level. She's a 34-year-old adult with legal standing. The question of her position doesn't arise. Marcus looked at him. The calculation was happening again, harder this time. Reed was not a variable Marcus had planned for, and Marcus did not handle unplanned variables gracefully. You have no idea what you're inserting yourself into, Marcus said. I have some idea, Reed said. He looked at Graham, who was already crossing the dock toward one of the marina's outdoor tables, carrying a laptop. My legal team has been reviewing Whitmore Capital's Pacific development filings for the past 18 months as part of a competing acquisition. In that review, they identified some irregularities. He paused. Significant ones. Graham placed the laptop on the table and turned the screen outward. Marcus's lead attorney leaned in. His face changed. There are 3 things on that document, Reed said. The first is a pattern of land use filings in the Bismarck Sea region that conflict with protected reef zone boundaries established under the 2019 Pacific Environmental Accords, the same accords that Dr. Navarro's research contributed to. The second is a series of fund transfers between Whitmore Capital and a shell entity in the Caymans that your own compliance officer flagged 18 months ago and which appear to have been suppressed from the quarterly audit. The third is a communication from Marcus Whitmore to his assistant dated 11:49 this morning, 2 minutes after Dr. Navarro's filing confirmation was time-stamped, instructing the cancellation of her phone service and the freezing of all joint accounts without legal authorization. Silence on the dock. The water moved against the pilings. A gull argued with something in the middle distance. Marcus's lead attorney straightened up from the laptop. He turned to Marcus and said, very quietly, something Claire couldn't hear. Marcus said nothing. The irregularities in the land filings alone are sufficient to trigger a regulatory review, Reed said. My team will be submitting them to the Pacific Environmental Authority tomorrow morning unless there is a compelling reason not to. He let the sentence sit for a moment. There is no compelling reason not to. Marcus looked at Claire. She had seen that look before. It was the look he had when he understood that a situation had moved beyond his management. The last time she'd seen it, she'd been in the hospital for a CT scan that had turned out to be nothing, and he had stood in the hallway with that look. Not concern, not fear, but the specific frustration of a man whose carefully maintained environment had introduced an element he had not sanctioned. She had recognized it then and made herself forget it. She was done forgetting. Marcus turned to his lead attorney. The attorney shook his head once. A tiny movement, the kind that means, not here, not now. We need to leave. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Whitmore had no move. He was the most controlled man she had ever known, and he was standing on a public dock in the gray October afternoon with $400 million in regulatory exposure, an illegal monitoring system about to be documented in a divorce filing, and a wife who was looking at him the way you look at something you used to be afraid of and aren't anymore. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the harbor. He did not look at her again. "My attorney will be in contact," she said. "You should go." She did not watch him leave. She walked back up the gangway to the aft deck and stood at the railing with her back to the dock, looking out at the harbor. The water was properly dark now, the last of the gray light settling into the surface like something that had given up arguing. She heard Reed come up behind her. He stopped at the railing a respectful distance away and looked out at the same water. "Grateful doesn't cover it," she said after a while. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "That's not what I said." She turned to look at him. "I said grateful doesn't cover it. I didn't say I owed you. They're different things." He looked at her for a moment, and then something in his face relaxed. Not dramatically, but perceptibly, the way a room relaxes when a window opens. "Your attorney will want to use those documents," he said. "I know. The freeze on your accounts was illegal. It'll be reversed within 48 hours once the filing is documented." "I know that too." "You prepared well." "I prepared for 8 months," she said. "He moved in 2 hours. I thought he was in Vancouver." "He took a private flight," Reed said. "The filing triggered an alert on a monitoring system he had installed without your knowledge. My team found it in the same sweep. Your attorney will want to know about that as well." She absorbed this with the particular stillness of someone absorbing one too many things at once. "How much of my life was monitored?" she said. "I don't know the full extent," Reed said. "Enough." She nodded once. She turned back to the water. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "The paper, my paper. You said it changed a $400 million decision." She paused. "Do you know if the reef survived?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "As of last year's survey data, yes, largely intact. The thermal event that would have been triggered by the construction ran 2 degrees higher than the 2016 baseline. The site would have been devastated." She exhaled. 3 years. She had spent 3 years learning which sparkling water Marcus preferred. And somewhere in the Pacific, a reef was intact because she had written a paper on a rocking boat at 2 in the morning during a tropical depression. "I need to get back to work," she said. "I know," Reed said. She looked at him. "That wasn't a hint." "I know that too," he said. "But if it becomes relevant, the Pacific survey my company deferred is still unfunded and still necessary. The organization I work with to manage the environmental compliance side has been looking for someone with your specific background for 2 years." He paused. "That is a hint. I'm being transparent about it." She almost laughed. She caught it just before it escaped, and the effort made her realize how long it had been since she'd had to catch one. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take as long as you need," Reed said. She stayed on the yacht that night. There was a guest cabin that was not at all uncomfortable and was, she noted with something approaching amusement, stocked with the kind of sparkling water she actually liked rather than the kind Marcus preferred. In the morning, she called her attorney from Graham's phone. The freeze on her accounts was illegal and would be reversed. The monitoring system was documented. The land use irregularities were real and were being filed with the Pacific Environmental Authority as of 9 a.m. The divorce would take months. There would be legal arguments and financial disputes and depositions that she would find exhausting and important in equal measure. She knew this. She had planned for it. But she had not planned for the morning. She was standing on the bow deck at 7 a.m. when the harbor master opened the channel and the first fishing boats of the day moved out past the breakwater. The wake reached her 7 minutes later, a small, rolling motion, the kind the ocean makes just to remind you it's still there. She felt the spray on her face. She closed her eyes. She had been in the ocean last on a July morning 3.5 years ago at a research site east of New Britain, hanging 30 feet below the surface with a waterproof camera and a measurement kit, watching a coral formation that had no name yet exist in the blue-green silence of a world that had not yet been simplified. She had forgotten what it felt like to be the person who did that. Standing on the bow in the October morning, she remembered. A week later, she was back at the marina. Not because of Nicholas Reed, though he had called twice, briefly, with information her attorney needed, nothing more. She was there because of the Pacific Environmental Authority survey coordinator, who had emailed her through her newly restored account with a subject line that read, "We've been trying to reach you for 2 years." She had replied within 3 minutes. The survey would begin in April. 14 weeks in the Bismarck Sea region, aboard a dedicated research vessel, with a team she had not yet met and equipment that was considerably better than the temperamental generator she remembered from her last time. She had signed the agreement standing at the marina railing with the harbor behind her and the October water in front of her. And when she pressed send, it felt nothing like the divorce confirmation had felt. It felt like something enormous. A door opening, a weight lifting, a sound. Sometimes the trap you're in has been built so gradually, with such patience and such care, that you stop being able to see its walls. You stop knowing what you wanted before the walls were there. You stop remembering what your own voice sounded like when it wasn't being managed. Claire Navarro had spent 3 years becoming invisible in a house that was not hers, doing work that was not hers, being the version of herself that someone else had decided was sufficient. She had filed a piece of paper at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and by evening she was standing on a stranger's boat watching the harbor go dark, holding a study she had written 3 years ago in both hands, like something she had almost let go of without noticing. She had not let go. The reef was intact, and so was she. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. The next one comes out Thursday. And drop a comment. Have you ever done work that mattered more than you knew? I want to hear it.